Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, where you are, my friends, my LinkedIn friends, and welcome to our deep dive into the world of employee stock option plan, which is called ESOPs also across India, United States, and Singapore. In today's session, we will explore the significant role of ESOPs in these diverse economies, focusing on their impact on employee retention, compliance, and the startup ecosystem. In India, ESOPs have become a critical component in the startup environment. The Startup Pulse report 2023 by Elevation Capital reveals that Indian startup favor ESOPs, especially for senior leadership roles, with ESOPs allocations constituting 10 to 50% of the cash component offered to candidates in entry to mid-level roles. That means that Indian startups actually keep component of salary up to 50% in the ESOP segment as per the report which was released by Elevation Capital. And startups are increasingly offering additional equity grants to leaders in light of muted cash increments, demonstrating the growing importance of ESOPs in the Indian startup sector. The country has witnessed a remarkable growth in startup from 350 recognized startups in 2014 to over 90,000 recognized startups in 2023, including more than 100 unicorns. In the United States, the environment is much more evolved and matured. About 18% of the total employees have some form of ownership stake in their companies, with over 10 million Americans participating in ESOPs. The total wealth of employees in corporations with ESOPs amounts to 1.8 trillion USD. These plans are not only about wealth creation, but also about enhanced job quality, workplace culture. However, challenges such as underrepresentation of Black, Latino, and American women workers among ESOPs are there, which is evolving also. The average wealth per ESOP employee stands at 180,000 USD, which demonstrates significant financial impact of these plans. Singapore's approach to ESOP reflects its robust regulatory framework. ESOPs are emerging as a key tool for motivating, retaining, and engaging employees across various industries. The city-state ensures strict compliance with regulatory standards, which is enabling a lot of global companies to move their base to Singapore because of the compliance and everything, which makes it easier to implement ESOP, because the regulatory diligence fosters trust among employees and ensures fair and transparent operations. As we proceed, we will delve into how these regions utilize ESOPs not only as a financial instrument but also as a strategic tool for aligning employee interest with organizational goal. We will examine the unique challenges and opportunities each country presents, backed by insightful data, and also the impact of ESOPs in engaging journey to understand a role of ESOP in shaping business landscape, fostering employee loyalty in India, US, and Singapore. And with this, I also invite Somik from my team, who will talk in detail about ESOPs.
I think Alok has given a brilliant introduction on why these ESOPs are important, what are the various statistics behind it, and how ESOPs are being used in our ecosystem in increasing the compliance framework, in increasing the employment retention technique, in increasing the motivation ways, right? So before we go deep in the ESOP structuring, ESOP compliance in India, US, Singapore, let's understand what is ESOPs, right? Now, ESOPs are traditionally are options which are given to the directors, which are given to the shareholders, the employees, to retain them, to motivate them, and which have a performance scheme or a basis. If they stay periodically for a periodical of a time, they get the options at a discounted rate, right? So basically, any companies give their employee the ESOPs with a very, very nominal price they have to pay. And it's given if you stay in the company for a particular period of time or you achieve a certain performance level, right? So these are given so as to help and attract and reward employees. They help in increasing the job satisfaction rate. They somehow also help the companies to defer the compensation strategy altogether. The employees are in alignment of the goal, and of course there's a good retirement benefit altogether. So on as Alok was giving the examples, I remember when Zomato's IPO took place, few of the employees got rewarded up to 50 lakh 1 CR due to their ESOPs that they held, right? So it's a very, very good technique where in one hand you increase the job satisfaction level of the employees, and at the same time you defer the entire compensation things, right? Now, traditionally, we always have believed that ESOPs are the traditional ESOPs. That is, you stay for a particular point of time and you get the shares of the company at a discounted rate. And this is the traditional ESOPs that are given and which I've covered in the first point. But nowadays, as the situation evolved, as startup ecosystem got far more matured, they developed different varieties of ESOP plans. So one, of course, is the traditional ESOPs where we give them the options, and the employees at a particular point of time exercise it, and that's how they get the shares. But of late, how things have evolved is that there is evolvement of something called phantom stocks. Right now, what is phantom stocks? Phantom stocks are basically you give them the options, right? This is the fair market value of today. If you stay for a particular point of time, or if you stay at a particular till your performance reaches this measurable quantity, then you get the upside. So say for example, I get a phantom stock of a particular company, and per share value is say 100 rupees, right? And I help the company to grow, and after say 5 years, the per share company is around 1,000 rupees. Okay, so number of shares into 1,000 minus 100, that is 900. 900 into number of shares is what the monetary compensation that I will get straight. That's the entire cash component. There is no shares, nothing. It's just straight cash component, which helps the employees as a whole, right? I mean, you do not have to get their shares. You just give them money, get the money. That's what the employees want. The founders are very much in sync with that because they do not have to share the cap table with the employees, right? The cap table is with the the founders itself, right? So that's how the phantom stocks have evolved. There is employee stock purchase scheme wherein for a particular period of time, every for the salary, from the salary something is deducted, and they get after a point of time the ESPs portion. That is, every month some amount is deducted and cumulatively you get something. The RSUs, on the other hand, is performance based. So if you reach a particular condition, your performance or a milestone, you get the RSUs. So this is how the things are structured. Now, what are the advantages and disadvantages of ESOP implementation? And uh, there are disadvantages like sometimes we stick to only traditional ESOPs. It's a bit complex for tech employees. You have to explain them. It's a transition. There's a long process of transition. Sometimes liquidity, especially in startup ecosystem, is a challenge, and there is a market volatility. So it's a bull market, bear market in the ecosystem valuation. Based on that, things happen. But on the other hand, the advantages are huge. You get a motivated pool of employees. They get a retirement benefit. Succession plan is there. Tax benefits if you plan accordingly, and there is an increase on productivity. Now, many a times what happens is that there are several things that are there in the ESOP plan, and both from the founder perspective as well as from the employee perspective, it is difficult to understand what are these terminologies. So we have tried to break it in layman terms. There are 5 or 6 important points that one need to understand during ESOP implementation, whether you are an employee or you are a founder of a startup which is giving this ESOPs. One is grant, that is the time when you actually offer the employees the number of options, and this is done on a particular grant date that is the date when which the offer is made. The vesting period is the period through which you will be giving this grant. So say, for example, you say ki you will get 100 ESOPs divided into 5 years, right? 20 each after each year. Now, this 5 years is called vesting period. The day this, say, in this 5 years, after 2 years, you decide to leave the organization. So it's 40 shares, that is 100 division by 5 into 2. So it's 40 shares. Now, that day, when you try to say, I want the shares for myself, that day is called exercise date. And this process is called exercise. Okay. Now, exercise period is when till the time you give the employees the option to buy. So say, for example, after 5 years, still this guy doesn't want to buy it, right? He says, I will continue as it is. And the company says, you have to buy within 6 or 7 years, right? So that period is called exercise period. If you do not buy it, it's called lapse of option. And at the price you buy it, it's usually the nominal rate, either 1 rupee or 2 rupee per share. This is called the exercise price. Now, how do one govern the ESOPs? Now, in India, it is governed under a company share capital and debenture rules, and it has to be read with Companies Act 2013. Now, it says that the ESOP can be given to both an Indian employee or a person outside India who is an employee. A director and can also be given, and an employee belonging to the subsidiary can also be given. However, you cannot give ESOPs to a promoter. Now, promoter is defined under Companies Act. So basically, anybody who has a direct or indirect control over the board of directors of the company or the decision making of the company is termed as a promoter, right? A director who either by himself or relative of body corporate of a company controls more than 10% of the company, you cannot give them. So basically, if you have a non-executive director, right, or you hire a CTO who happens to be in the board of the directors of the company, then you can give him, but you cannot give him more than 10% of the equity share. However, in case of through a special resolution, and when I say special resolution is 75% of the shareholders, if they agree, then there are ways that you can give them, but there are certain restrictions which are far more customized and have to be deep driven to understand. But this is the holistic overview of the entire process to understand. Now, the process of implementation is we have to draft a ESOP agreement, and the charter, the memorandum and article of association should allow. If it doesn't allow, it should change. The article of association should be modified, and it should allow ESOP implementation, because until that happened, any startup, any private limited company cannot give it, right? Then a board meeting has to be passed. A EGM notice has to be given along with the explanatory statement. What is the ESOP plan? What are the grant letters? What are exercise date, exercise period? How many ESOPs are given? The entire thing has to be annexed. The shareholders should approve it, and then an MGT 14 has to be filed. A valuation report is mandated as per Income Tax Act, and this once the valuation report is come in, you can offer the grant letter to all the concerned employees on this. Also, you have the Companies Act mandates that once you offer this, ESOP registered under SS6 has to be maintained by the company, right? Now, let's understand this into different perspective. Now, how is ESOP tax? And Alok, you can come in over here. So ESOP generally have two phases. One, the traditional ESOPs, and second, the under budget 2020, there had been a modification for specifically for startup. In this, at first, let us underview what is in general, what is ESOPs. For taxation, during ESOP taxation in India, perquis is forming the total salary component is tax. So whatever perquis is the ESOPs is added during the time of exercise of option, and you get it under your perquisites. The capital gain is done when you sell these shares. So you get at a say a 10 at a value of 10 rupees, and then you sell the shares. Then of course you get the capital gain portion. The capital gain is again divided into a short-term capital gain if it's under 10 years, it's under 1 year, and if it's more than 1 year, you have to get 20%. But there is a leverage that if you take the benefit of indexation, then it's 20%. If you do not take the benefit of indexation, then again is 10%. Now this is for the general sort of a framework. Now for eligible startups under budget 2020, there were various modification that came in. Now what are these modification? The
So,
modification.
so Soumik, so let me explain
Sure,
that,
sure.
and let me just give a background also in terms of what was happening. If you go to the slide, the last slide. So what was happening, friends, is that since the tax was getting collected at two stages. So for ESOPs, the taxes were collected at two stages. One is at the time when the ESOPs are being assigned, and the perquisites, and the difference between the uh, FMV of the shares and the exercise price. So, for example, I as a company, the FMV of per share of my company is say 100 rupees, and I am giving shares to my employees at 20 rupees. So 80 rupees is the difference which the employee is actually making extra, because they're getting a equity or a security or an asset which is lower to the market price on that particular day. So that 80 rupees is being taxed as a salary in the form of perquisites when for in the year in which this has been assigned or exercise. So basically the moment you exercise your right, you get that, and it has been taxed in that year. The second was that, it was to bring at par with the cost of equity to the common public. So to the common public, if it's 100 rupees, to bring the cost at par, the government said that because you are getting something at a cheaper rate, so the difference you have to pay taxes on the difference. And the normal salary tax rate, depending on the individual slab, was fixed for taxing that perquisite. That's number one. Number two was when you were exiting. So when you were exiting, you were paying capital gain based long term, short term, depending on the period you hold, and also there is a indexation benefit which is given. The problem was that, so let me go to the next slide. The problem was that what was happening is that so employees were actually paying taxes on something which they didn't realize. So I am paying taxes on the difference for which I have not even realized that gain. So startups are cash short, we all know. So what has happened is that the government, and there was a lot of representation which was made to the government. So the government understood this problem, and they said that instead of paying tax at the time of allotment or exercise, the perquisite amount which I'm talking about, employees of the eligible startups can now defer the tax payment until 48 months after the end of the relevant assessment year. So if you have been assigned the shares, say in this financial year, you can defer 48 months after the end of this assessment year on the sale of is or on the sale of ESOP shares, or when employee ceases to be employed by the ESOP allotting company, whichever is the earliest. So the government says, okay, fine, you don't pay taxes till 48 months, or till the time till you ceases to be employee of the company, or when you sell the ESOP shares. So this was done, and eligible startups under the government which are recognized were not required to deduct TDS also on the ESOPs at the time of allotment or exercise. So this problem was reduced. The only problem now which stands, and which is also a big problem in the sense that because of the layoffs, and because what is happening in the startup ecosystem, and because of so many changes in the employment, if an employee leaves after 2 years, then at the time of leaving he has to pay taxes on the perquisite. So that problem still stays. So if today what has been removed is, you do not pay till the time you do not leave the company, you do not pay till the time you do not sell your shares, you do not pay up to 4 years. whichever is the earliest. But still, if you leave the company within 4 years, or if you sell the shares, then you have to pay. So the leaving of the company is still the problem, which still we are talking to the government, and let's see what happens if this comes this year. But this is a big challenge. There is no TDS now, that the burden has been removed, and the eligibility for all these things is that you must be recognized by DPIT. So it's not a standard startup recognition. It's a recognition which is specifically done for DPIIT, which is Department for Promotion of Industry and Trade, and have obtained a certificate under Section 81 IAC. So this is basically that income tax exemption benefit wala point, wherein you get an additional certificate, which is the third layer of startup recognition by the government. At that level, you are eligible to claim benefit of income tax, and you are also eligible for this exemption which is being given, or relaxation which is given to the employees of that particular startup. I think
Right.
I've made
And
clear.
yeah, Alok, and one quick point also, you have put it brilliantly that it's not what every startups will get it. It's once you get a DPIIT certificate under Startup India, then you have to apply for a certificate under Section 80 IASC, and only if you get an 80 IASC certificate, then your employees will get that. And this is very important, what Alok has pointed out, because for any holding subsidiary relationship, so if your captive is in Singapore and your employees are in India, right, on a subsidiary basis, which is very common in the ecosystem, you do not get the Startup India benefit. So employees of startups whose capital are in outside India and have a structure in India, for that matter, if that startup have any subsidiary anywhere in the world, in India or outside, because Startup India registration clearly mandates that if you cannot become the holding entity or a subsidiary entity. So in case that is also effective, then also you will not get this exemptions and you have to fall back in the traditional ESOP taxation, right? So right, so that's from the taxation from the Indian point of view. Now we will divulge to the ESOP from the Singapore perspective, right? Now, Singapore is again it's a very preferred destination for ESOPs implementation, simply because there are less paperwork. There are valuation report is not mandated. You get a global audience from Singapore. It's very fairly taxed. The tax rate are quite cheap, and of course, more importantly, they have treaties with different countries, right? So employees from different geographies can join it and get the benefits, right? Even if they do not set in Singapore, they can get Singapore-based ESOP companies, ESOP usually back in their respective geographies. Now, now, at first, just to want to give a brief overview, the process is again fairly simple. You have to have a ESOP plan. You then get a board resolution done, undertaken, and the shareholders should also approve it, and you're good to go. The Singapore mandates that the company has the entire way to allot these jobs. So you can have a expedited vesting. There is no cliff period. You can give the entire share from day one itself. You can structure the ESOP plan at completely at the discretion of the board of directors. So there are no particular guidelines behind it. The government gives total leeway to startups and companies to have their structure included, be it companies that are owned by foreigners or companies that are owned by Singaporean. The entire leeway is given, right? Now, the tax treatment of Singapore is again during the time of exercise and restrictions. If there are restrictions during the time of lifting of these restrictions, this taxation will be triggered, and this taxation will be given in case both the employees, if it's in Singapore or outside Singapore. If it's outside Singapore, then the DTAA between the countries where the employee belongs to or resides and the Singaporean, that DTAA has to be studied, and then the taxation will be involved in this regard. Now, ESOP in US is again has two major sort of advantages. It's far more matured in all the three geographies. US is the most the country with more matured ESOP background, and it of course is a simple which we have already spoken about. That is it helps the productivity, retain talent. It helps in the corporate finance management as well. In ESOPs in US, there are two type of ESOPs down the line. One where the employees are directly given ESOPs by the company, or the other method is the ESOP plan is allocated to a trust, and that trust is then again allocates ESOPs altogether. Now, as per the compliance is concerned, we need to check whether it's a startup or a private limited or a public limited company. Then we have to have this entire ESOP plan where the is mandated to have the eligibility, granting, vesting, exercise, dispute resolution all put in. Okay. The third is, of course, you have to get the shareholders' approval and also file, if necessary, to the SEC. The ESOP committee will oversee the entire plan, and we need to maintain the accurate transaction of this. Now, taking all the three geographies into consideration, there is one more thing that people forget is the RBI compliance. So say, for example, if the company, the subsidiary is based in India of the overseas company, or you are a shareholder of a foreign company back in India, or the Indian company issues shares to a foreign resident, right? In all the three cases, RBI compliance has to be done. And more often than not, people forget the RBI compliance and get the scrutiny notices from the Reserve Bank of India. So one needs to be very, very clear about it. In case of any cross-border structure or employees residing both in India and in overseas geographies of and getting shares of a foreign company or Indian company, you need to check the RBI guidelines before the allocation is done. So when FEMA is applicable, RBI compliance is applicable when a foreign company wishes to grant ESOPs, right, to its employees working in India or to the employees of the Indian subsidiary company. So if your capable sits in Singapore and you have a subsidiary in India, then, and if you want to allocate ESOPs to the employees of the subsidiary, then the grant will be applicable. And again, when an Indian company grants option to employees outside India or for employees to the WS of the Indian company, then also this compliance will be triggered. Now, what are the compliances that has to be done? First, we need to understand what does the regulation says. The regulation has been modified in August 2022. It says that there are no limit for a residential individual to acquire shares. A resident individual being an employee of the Indian or a branch of the overseas entity, or a subsidiary in India of the overseas company, an Indian entity which the overseas entity direct or indirect equity holding, right? So many a times what happens is that in this structure, you do not have a direct equity holding, you have an indirect control. So also this is applicable. The indirect equity holding is done through control or any other influence which tantamounts to control, right? So you control the board of directors, you control the shareholding pattern, you control the key decision making of the company. Then also this regulation will be undertaken. Now, every year when this regulation is triggered in, right? Every year the subsidiary entity, that is an Indian entity, shall file Annexure 4 of the ESOP reporting to Reserve Bank of India through AD Bank, so as to report the ESOP allotment of foreign securities of the holding company. So if your holding company is outside India and you are employed the subsidiary, every year that company has to report that. And in case there is a sale of shares, then again you have to report that. The report will also, with the details issued under ESOPs to the Reserve Bank of India under 30 days of such allotment, should also be done on periodical basis. And there are forms on 15 July. You have to file these forms. Now, again, this is from the context key. You have a overseas company issuing shares to the Indian employees, right? Now, there is one more situation when the Indian company is issue ESOP to the overseas employees. One need to be very careful of the sectoral caps, because you cannot cross the sectoral caps no matter what, even if you go for ESOPs. That is very, very important. There are citizens of Bangladesh and Pakistan. So if you're a subsidiary in Bangladesh or Pakistan and you want to issue ESOPs, you have to take special approval. There are government approvals that has to be taken in these cases. And of course, there are compliances under Companies Act or SEBI, right? That has to be undertaken. Now, there are RBI reporting also in this case. In this case, the RBI has to be reported to SMF portal within 30 days of grant of option not exercise. Is very important to understand. The moment you offer them ESOPs, you have to report it. And this SMS portal should also be submitted when they exercise the option. So say, for example, I offered the options and after 1 year or 2 years, they exercise it. Then also within 30 days, you have to offer the form to SMF portal to the Reserve Bank of India guideline as per the RBI guidelines. So that's about it. This is the entire structure. Alok, if you could quickly summarize this entire thing, and we can proceed accordingly.
Well, I think thanks, Somik, for that. So basically, uh, the overall objective of this LinkedIn Live was to ensure that we keep our founders on top of it, on top of the compliance, and if, while they fulfill the overall objective of retaining employees and delaying and postponing the cash outflow because they want to hire people at senior level, and also from a compliance perspective, how do they are on the top of the compliance vis-a-vis US, Singapore, and India. So we have been doing this. We have done with close to 200 companies now because we do a lot of global structure and global taxation. And feel free to reach to us. We will be more than happy to support and help. You can reach out, you can message me anytime, or you can reach out to my team or to the TMG page anytime. And with this, we thank our audience, and we also thank Somik and Dipanjali for setting up this LinkedIn Live.